It's back to school time. Hello, my name is Carrie. This is my channel Gender Mix. This is where I normally talk about my life as a non-binary genderqueer adult and try to provide resources and just put things out into the universe for the greater good. I'm also a high school counselor, and so I thought it would be a really good thing to kind of combine some areas of expertise of my own to make back to school a little bit easier for those of you who are non-binary or genderqueer or trans or gender non-conforming or under one of those umbrellas or multiple umbrellas there, from the perspective of someone who deals with this stuff personally but also like professionally. And I will let you know that LGBTQ issues are a big focus in like the education and school counseling community, with a big emphasis on trans issues. I have been to conferences where there are like usually a couple different panel type things about trans issues. I actually went to a conference that was completely about working with trans patients for counselors this past summer, which is 2017. The Professional School Counselor Association put out a special edition magazine specifically on working with LGBTQ students. And I'm telling you this to say the vast majority of school counselors and educational professionals are on board with doing the right thing for their trans, gender non-conforming, non-binary students. They are trying to learn, they are interested in this. They want you to have an affirming educational environment that you are entitled to and deserve. That said, I do need to put this little disclaimer in. I cannot guarantee that every single person you encounter will be on board. I can't guarantee that you won't be at a school where the school faculty might be on board, but the community is very oppositional. If you're at like a religious school, there's a really good chance that you have in writing some kind of policy that's like prohibits LGBTQ plus behaviors or expression or that type of thing. And I can't say that you haven't walked down your hallway in school and overheard a teacher or a counselor say something disparaging or really negative or just completely wrong about trans people, and so you're a little bit gun shy about actually coming out to them. Those are all valid things. Just because I'm putting this information out there, do not feel like you are obligated to come out to people, that you have to tell people that you have to do things this way. Be safe. Don't put yourself in a situation where you don't feel like you're safe at all. If you're just not comfortable, if you're not ready to come out yet, that's okay. You don't have to. That's completely up to you. I think that's all the disclaimer I needed to get out there, but I think that's really important to say because every single person's experience is different. What you want your school experience to be like in terms of how your gender identity is acknowledged is different. You're the expert of your life. I'm just here to, like I said, give you some information from someone who has some expertise personally and professionally in this very, very specific area. I'm doing a little series of videos because I tried to just record one video and it was ridiculously long and still left out everything. So this is the first one, and this is just about talking to your school counselor if you should. What types of things should you think about talking to if you are coming out? This could be back to school, it could be if you come out in the middle of the school year, it could be if you move to a school, anytime. Here are some things that you should be cognizant of, look for, think about discussing with your school counselor. This is a moment I'm going to say, if you are the parent or guardian of someone and you can think to ask any of these things on your students' behalf. In general, I'm a big advocate of, especially with older students, really pushing them to do things for themselves and learn to embrace their autonomy. But it can be really mentally and emotionally kind of draining to always be doing stuff affiliated with your gender identity, and it can really take over your life. So this is one area where I would encourage you to ask some of these questions for them or do things on their behalf when you can, or with them, talk about it with them. Don't just do it without talking to them, but be aware that this is definitely an area where you can kind of jump in and help. And if you're a school counselor that happens to see this, feel free to throw these things out to students and not put all of it on them automatically. Probably the number one thing is, what do you want to be called? What name do you want to be used? What pronouns do you want to use? And who do you want to use them? There are students who may be out to a couple teachers, a couple friends, maybe their school counselor, but no one else, not even their parents. And so we need to know how to address you and how to speak with you in different groups of people. So if I'm the only person that knows, if you tell me first, I will be more than happy to use your chosen name or names that you're trying out and your pronouns just with you in the confines of my office. But if I am calling home to your parents or send them an email about something, anything, like it doesn't, not necessarily like related to gender stuff, it's going to be your old name or your other pronouns, or maybe you want to compromise and use like they, like a neutral pronoun in those situations, so you're not being super misgendered, only like semi-misgendered if you don't use they pronouns. That's an important thing to know, and it's a big miss, I think. There are people who, if a student says, I'm gonna try this name or use these pronouns, they're gonna just hopefully kind of start using them all the time or try to use them all the time. But you don't want to out a student to a parent that doesn't know yet or isn't on board and the student is explicitly not out to them. Here's the other thing. So when you're having that conversation, maybe you do want all of your teachers to start using this name and these pronouns. That's great. How do you communicate that? Some students will say they just want to talk to their teachers one-on-one in class. Some students first day, roll call, they'll just say, oh, I use this name. That's gonna be a minority. The easiest way, I think, to communicate that is draft an email, do it with the student there if you can. You can list to their teachers, what classes they've got, because your school counselor will have access to that information. And just let the teachers know, hey, you have a student in your class this year, on your roster, they're going to have this name. They actually use this name and these pronouns, and you should use those when addressing the student and in class. If you're a teacher, I know the school I was at last year, most of the teachers actually printed out their like seating chart or just class roster with pictures. And it was helpful for them to like put faces with names at the beginning of the year and just write in like the correct name, because that's gonna give you that mental, like you're gonna see that kid's face and see the correct name, and it'll help you quickly get that. But also then if you have substitutes come in, it's a little bit less awkward because there's a reference for the substitute also with the correct name. I would even argue in favor of maybe writing pronouns down if you think it's not going to be explicitly clear for any reason. Like, I use they, them pronouns, so they're not going to, see what I did? I just used a singular they. But that substitute's not going to assume they, them pronouns for anyone probably. So maybe put like stuff like that down. Those are just some suggestions for teachers to like make it easier for you, to help you acclimate. I'll also say be open to students who are exploring and are not sure. I had a student this past year who I only knew him as his chosen name, and at the end of the year, I was talking to his teacher about like classroom performance. But they told me that at the beginning of the year, he was kind of trying out his new name, and his birth name is actually a very gender neutral name. So he, I think, was deciding if he wanted to change it. And he would alternate days and just have like a little name tag that he would put up in that class only. And that's the name he used that day in that class, just to kind of figure out what he liked. So that's something else you can do. If your teacher be on board with that, who cares? It's simple, they're putting it right in front of your face for you, and you're like affirming them and making them feel included. And I'm going to throw this out here really quick. A lot of school systems are not going to have a place for like an alternate name, a preferred name, a nickname, because you're probably thinking, why not just put that in? The school I was at last year did not have that. However, it was getting built into their system over the summer. Like every summer they do some software upgrades, and that was one. And they were super excited because it's good for like trans and non-binary students. It's also good for all kinds of other students. Your name could be Jonathan and you go by John. We had a ton of international students who used nicknames. Sometimes they were like nicknames from their home country or shortened versions of a very long name, or sometimes more Americanized names, and like there's cultural issues with that, I know, but students go by lots of different names that have nothing to do with whether or not they're trans or non-binary, they just like that name. So that was getting built into the system, so ask your school counselor if there's a way to just put that in the system, but know that there's a good chance there's not. And it's not your school counselor like not being willing to do it, it's a limitation of the software they're given to work with. Kind of like our software indicates male or female for students, or last year my sophomore did, and it was on everything and it didn't need to be. So if there's a way to exclude that information, like I would have been much more comfortable with that, because you need to know that on a daily basis, like it's irrelevant. So I think those are the big things, just starting out, what name you want, pronouns, how to communicate that to teachers, how to communicate it to classmates. If you're younger, you're in like the same class for the majority of the day, and you can kind of, if you want, if you're a parent, you know, come in and talk about it with students and like, hey, this student's going by this now. If you're older, like junior high and high school especially, you're in multiple classes throughout the day. It's likely you have a small group of friends who you started to use these names with. and pronouns, but not necessarily. That's going to be something to talk through again with your counselor and your teachers. Like, if they call out a name on the roll, and especially if you've been in that school and students already know you, and now you're using a different name, there's gonna be a kid who says something, whether it's something rude, hopefully not, but we all know how teenagers can be, or whether they just ask, like, why'd you change your name, or what are you talking about? On that email to teachers, you can talk about if you want them to address that and say, like, the student changed their name and changed their pronouns, if you want them to say they're trans, if you want the teacher to give you the floor to say that yourself, or if you want them to kind of brush by it. So talk through that with your counselor. If you know any of the teachers, you may have a good rapport with them already and be able to kind of work that out. Like the one student who did a trial, he only did that in that one class because he was comfortable with that teacher and with enough other students in there that it was a safe enough space for him to try that out. And then when he decided to go with his name that he did, make that like a blanket for all of his classes. So there's a lot of wiggle room, but those are some like first things to do right away. And again, like this is, it's back to school. You can do this at any point during the school year. If you are unsure how someone is going to react, this was the other piece I wanted to say. This is why I'm making an entire series. It's a lot of information. You can do two things. One is look through your school's handbook because they're going to have some kind of policies dealing with like discipline, bullying, zero tolerance, harassment. Look for language that explicitly identifies sexuality and gender identities because that's a good sign that, hey, your school is already kind of dealing with this stuff and is at least aware that it exists. If not, then that might be something to talk to them about adding. The other piece is if you're just really not sure, but you really want to be able to come out, if you're out to your parents, like you can have them do this phone call or you can make a phone call yourself to a school counselor or administrator and ask them, like, what's your policy for students who are trans or non-binary? They're probably not going to know what you mean. If you say non-binary, you might need to see it to say trans, or like, I've really started just describing my gender as non-binary trans because it's a little bit more understood by people, but not as much. And see if they even have one. If they're like, the school I was at last year was, I don't want to say it was like, who cares, but it was kind of like, okay, so you're trans, like that's fine. We'll just, what do you want to do? Or if they kind of push back and have a lot of like questions, you can ask that school counselor if you're at least confident in talking to that school counselor, because that's a confidential conversation. And just in general, when you talk to a counselor, those conversations are confidential and private. There are exceptions that have to do with you harming people, people harming you, you harming yourself. Like, they're going to report that. We have to report that. That's for your own safety. But you telling me your gender identity, if you don't want to tell anyone else, that's confidential. Even if we don't explicitly state that, like, I'm not going to walk out and tell other counselors, like, hey, I just met with a student and they're trans, unless you tell me you want me to do that. Like, it's a confidential conversation. So know that if you have a lot of questions, if you're in a questioning phase where you're not ready to come out, you're not even sure what your gender is, a counselor is a good person to talk to about it because of that. And there's a really, really good chance that they'll have some resources. They should have resources to give you, whether it's, if you're in a bigger community that might actually have like a teen, like LGBTQ center. Like the city I live in has that. I don't think the school I'm at, I don't think there's going to be something like that immediately. Whether it's hotlines, websites, all those kinds of resources. If there's a GSA at the school, they can hook you up with that, or like a similar type of LGBTQ plus student organization. Your school counselor is a resource for you, or they should be a resource for you. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's a big push in like trying to understand, like, how do we help these students have a really great educational experience. This was just the first video in this series. I will talk about things like bathrooms and locker rooms and sports, but if you have specific things that you want me to talk about that have to do with, like, I'm going to school and like, what should I or should I not say or talk to a counselor about, leave me a comment below. I will also put in the description box two resources. One is GLSEN, which has model school policies if your school does not have any policies for trans students. The other one is, I have probably mentioned this on this channel before, a woman who has a trans kid and runs a blog called, I believe it's called Gender Nonconforming Mom. And she has tons of resources, including other model school policies, letters you can write. She is based in Ohio, so some of the like legal stuff may be specific to Ohio, but it's a good structure to work with. She makes it all available for free. Those resources will be below. Goodbye. I will talk to you soon. Have a great week.